All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. We'll let you guys start cycling in here. Welcome, everyone. So I've got an awesome guest today, Justin Harris, and we'll get into a little bit more of a true bio once we get this thing going. But we'll let everyone get in here, and then I'll kind of lay out the land for you guys jumping in. Some of you, this might be your second or third talk today, so you'll get to hear the spiel again. But we've got two ways that you can communicate with us. We've got the chat function, and then we've got the Q&A function. The chat function works great if you want to just give a shout out, or if Justin said something that really resonated with you, that's great because we can't actually see you, right? This is all virtual, so that's a good way to just do little comments. And then the Q&A function is for actual questions that you want answered. And that's really where we're going to run off today. We've got some topics that we're going to dig into, specifically around kind of carb cycling and that kind of stuff. But Justin is has a wealth of knowledge that we can pull from. And so we can go wherever we need to go with this conversation. So definitely use that Q&A. If you have questions right off the bat that you want Justin to answer, just start throwing those in the Q&A section. In the chat, I'd love to know where you're coming from. Where are you listening to us? Are you coming from in the US? Are you in Canada? Are you out in the UK? We had some people from India on some earlier talks. So let us know where you're coming from. Get familiar with some of these things. Seattle, looks like Kim Marie coming out of Bend. They're really popping in here quick. I can't even say them anymore. We got India in the house again, Chicago, Jesse out of Texas. Nice. Minnesota again. I appreciate you guys showing up today. There's a lot of things you could be doing today, and you showing up with us. We appreciate that. And we don't take that lightly. So it looks like our cycle is kind of slowed down here a little bit. So remember, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A. That's what I'm going to run off of for Q&A. So my ultimate goal for this is to just hit record. And I'm going to do that right now. That's the most important thing that I need to do. So, all right, let's get to it. I'm excited to introduce our next guest. This session was brought to you by Coach Catalyst, your nutrition accountability tech partner. You can get started today with no credit card. And on our soon-to-be extinct 30-day trial with plans starting at $39, Coach Catalyst can grow with you as a coach. And remember, as an added bonus for this summit, anyone that signs up for a trial will get our nutrition coaching playbook on the house. And so it'll automatically happen if you signed up for a trial. If you did it before, just send us a message, support at Coach Catalyst, and we'll hook you up with that. So if you need to find out the trial, go to coachcatalyst.com/summit. So I'm super excited to announce our next guest here. His name is Justin Harris, and a few things that he's got going on. Troponin Nutrition is one of his companies. Myoplasmic.com is another one. He's got a master in physics, which is really interesting. I'll probably quiz him or ask a little bit about that because it's definitely interesting in the fitness industry, and definitely a lot of accomplishments himself. State powerlifting champion and also a bodybuilding champion. And personally for me, if I want to learn more about nutrition or dig deep into nutrition, I dig deep into the bodybuilding world because they're the ones that nutrition makes or breaks success and failure, right? And so they're the people that are doing it the best. And so without further ado, Justin, did I miss anything? Anything else you want to share there?
I don't know. I think that sounded like everything to me. I don't know. Am I on video? Because I can't see me.
No, hit your video down at the bottom. I think we just have your thing. There we go.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Cool, man. All right, so we got some Q&As that have already come in. So unless you have anything you want to kick off with.
I'll start out with just kind of a brief synopsis of carb cycling and why I do it. It might trigger some good Q&A questions. So I'm kind of known for carb cycling, and it's really what I do is really more calorie cycling. Primarily, the biggest macronutrient that's cycled is carbohydrates. So I call it carb cycling, but it's really a total macro adjustment from day to day. And basically what we do, and I'll take it through kind of a fat loss protocol, because that's where the specifics become most important. And so obviously to burn fat, you need to be in a hypocaloric state. And from a purely thermodynamic standpoint, that's all that matters. If you eat 2,000 calories a day and burn 2,500 calories a day, you'll be a net negative of 500 calories, which over 7 days is 3,500 calories, which is roughly 1 pound of stored body fat energy per week. But then why do the macronutrients become so important if it just comes down to calories in versus calories out? And that's because we store calories in multiple ways. The calories we want to remove from the body, obviously, are fat stores, but we don't just store calories as fat. We store them as fat, we store them as glycogen, and we store them as muscle. So what we're trying to do is maximize how we partition those calories. And so at any given moment, from a thermodynamic standpoint, it's just calories in versus calories out. But over a course of a diet, there's many moments. And so what ends up happening is, so a 300-pound person has 300 pounds of stored energy in their body, but the metabolic nature of those stored calories is different than a 300-pound bodybuilder, because there's a constant turnover of muscle proteins that need to be replenished. And so there has to be more than just calories in versus calories out as far as body composition. Not necessarily as far as total body mass, but as far as body composition, there definitely is. So what we try to do with carb cycling is we create a glycogen depletion. So there's less glycogen stores for glycolysis, and the body needs to tap into fat stores more often for energy. We do that on the low and medium days. Now what happens though is you get so depleted in glycogen, eventually you start losing strength, you start losing good energy stores to fuel that glycolysis. While fat stores give a higher number of ATP, they're harder to tap into. And so to prevent metabolic slowdown, to prevent overly flat, physique appearance, to prevent weakness in the gym, periodically we'll incorporate a high carbohydrate day. And what that allows you to do is actually eat a hypercaloric intake. So you eat more calories than you burn, which from a purely calories in versus calories out standpoint means you'll be storing calories, storing fat. But the way we do it is we replenish those calories from carbohydrate sources in a glycogen depleted state. And I'll give a quick example. Someone my size might still be able to store 1,000 grams of glycogen through their whole body, roughly. Who knows really what it is, but something like that. Now this would never happen, but let's say I completely deplete glycogen to 0 grams over the course of the week on my medium and low carbohydrate days. Let's also say that with a moderate protein intake, my basal metabolic rate while I'm working out and things like that would allow me to eat 500 grams of carbohydrates in a day without storing any of them as fat. So if I'm 1,000 grams of glycogen depleted and I'm able to eat 500 grams of carbohydrates without storing fat, then that would allow me to eat 1,500 grams of carbohydrates that day, which is a calorie intake far above my basal metabolic rate. But because they're a specific type of calorie and I'm in a specific glycogen depleted state, all 1,500 grams of those carbs are either burned or stored as glycogen, which then provides benefits of boosting my metabolism, boosting my energy, allowing me to fuel training better earlier in the later part of the week before I get depleted again. So that's kind of the general approach of carbohydrate cycling. Obviously, there's much more because the high carbohydrate intake stimulates insulin. Insulin's increases protein amino acid uptake at the site of cell binding. And so there's lots of other things going on, but that's kind of the general, circumferential view. And so I'd like to open it to questions now if we can.
Yeah. So, on that, strategies for glycogen depletion, do you see it mainly as a nutritional strategy, or are you using exercise strategies to help deplete glycogen maybe a little bit faster?
Both. You're naturally going to burn glycogen as your first energy source, no matter what. And so just going through the day in a calorie depleted state, you're going to burn glycogen. We don't actively try to deplete glycogen. We try to burn more calories than we eat, on every day but the high carb day. And just by the natural way the body prefers to use glycolysis before burning fat for energy, it's going to deplete glycogen that way anyway. And especially during weight training, you're going to deplete glycogen. That's always, after the creatine phosphate stores are used in the first couple of reps of an exercise, that's always the primary energy source.
And do you see a ratio that works really well? Is it 2 or 3 days in a low carb state and then 1 day kind of in a high carb state, or is it once a week? What do you see?
It depends. It depends dramatically on where you are in the season for a bodybuilder or power lifter, and then also where your body fat is and how much body fat you need to lose and how many weeks we have. But typically, the standard approach I do in a fat loss diet is 1 high carbohydrate day per week. And for most people, you're not going to completely restore glycogen 100% in 1 day in a week, but you don't even want that because you need to be somewhat depleted to kind of coerce the body into burning fat stores. But 1 day a week for most people is enough to replenish it to where strength isn't depleted. You're not eating away muscle tissue. You're not running into any issues with a slowed metabolism. And I'm hesitant to say slow metabolism because people get far, far too worried about metabolic slowdown in a calorie deficit. Most studies show that outside of the natural decrease in metabolic rate because you've actually lost weight, so you're burning less calories through movement, there really isn't much slowdown in metabolism with body weight loss. And so people think, like I've been on a long diet, they think their metabolism slows down, but the studies don't really correlate with that. They don't show that. And it can be kind of misleading. And I'll give an example. I'll try to. Let's say, early on in the diet, a lot of the weight you're losing is water weight also. And water almost looks like fat because water under the skin covers the muscles just the same way as fat does. So really kind of was almost interchangeable early in the diet. Let's say I create a small calorie deficit of 500 calories a day and I lose 2 pounds per week. Because of the 500 calorie a day deficit, I've only lost 1 pound of fat, but I've lost 2 pounds per week. And so that 2 pounds is less body mass than I'm carrying around each day. So in 6 weeks later, that 500 calorie deficit, now I've lost most of the water weight. So I'm no longer losing 2 pounds from that. I'm only losing 1 pound, which right there seems like my metabolism slowed down because my body weight isn't decreasing as quickly. But my fat loss is roughly the same. It might have slowed a little bit because I'm burning 100 calories less per day because I weigh less. But it's really kind of a trick of the scale or trick of the numbers is that early on at a certain calorie deficit, you lose a smaller percentage of body fat for the weight you lost. As the diet goes on, you actually lose a higher percentage of body fat for the total weight you've lost because the water kind of leaves. But because you're moving less, even though the higher your metabolism, technically, if you put a person in a room and just didn't let them move and sat there for 24 hours, their metabolic rate would be roughly the same. But because they're carrying less body mass, when they perform exercises, their calorie expenditure is lower. And so it kind of tricks the mind into thinking your metabolism slows down because the rate of scale weight loss isn't as rapid. But it's not really what happens.
And do you see this carb cycling strategy? I mean, you're talking about it in a bodybuilding world, but have you seen it in the kind of general pop type world as well as being a successful intervention for people that need to lose weight?
Oh yeah, I've used it in various forms for everything from MMA fighters to powerlifters to strongman competitors to even just housewives. And when you just have housewives and they're looking for a scale weight change, you can really almost turn it into just a pure calorie cycling diet. So what's really easy to do with that is, because you'll get a lot of females especially who they don't want to eat chicken and rice. They like, maybe it's just the fact that I've come across females that seem to prefer this one, but they would rather be allowed to eat a wider variety of food, but not count the macros quite as precisely. So what you can do there is really simply, you can have 1 day a week where they eat maybe 2,000 calories a day, where their basal metabolic rate might be 1,700 calories. So it's a 300 calorie surplus. But even though they probably are going to be having higher fat than a really precise macronutrient ratio plan, most of their food is still going to come from sources that potentially can be stored as glycogen, and that's really protein and carbohydrates. And people don't think it's protein as a carbohydrate, but really protein is a carbohydrate in the body. And you could do the math. If you took, lots of bodybuilders eat 500 grams of protein a day. Well, 500 grams is 1.1 pounds, 2.2 kilograms per pound or pound per kilogram, whatever. Well, 500 grams is 1.1 pounds. And so if you're eating 500 grams of protein and not gaining 1.1 pounds of muscle per day, that means that protein isn't being used for protein synthesis. And clearly, the vast majority of protein we eat isn't being used as protein synthesis. Because you can do the math. Even if you gain 25 grams of protein per day, you're going to gain like 15 pounds of muscle a year. That's only 1 gram per hour of actual protein synthesis. So most of the protein you eat is actually used as a carbohydrate in the body. And that can be beneficial as a coach because it can't be used directly as a carbohydrate. It has to go through gluconeogenesis and turned into a carbohydrate. Well, anytime you change something, you take a clump of clay and turn it into a different shape, it takes energy to do that. And the same thing happens with protein. It takes energy to turn protein from a protein to glucose. So really, even though to get back to my main point, with a female with just not counting macros, most of their calorie intake is still going to be a form of calories that can be converted to glycogen. George, can you please stop? Sorry, I really having trouble concentrating.
No worries. I think let's stay on this note. I'm kind of going through the questions. I'm going to try and lump them here so that we're not jumping all over the place. But any major differences in carb calorie cycling for enhanced athletes versus carb calorie cycling for natural athletes?
Yes, but not as dramatic as people think, but there always is going to be a difference. There just is. When you're enhanced, your rate of protein synthesis is astronomically higher. Your rate of, you can break down proteins through training and repair them much quicker than otherwise. Your insulin sensitivity is generally improved. Your nitrogen retention from the protein you eat is improved. So everything just kind of works better when you're enhanced. It doesn't mean it doesn't work when you're not enhanced. It just means you need to be much more precise. You have less leeway, and there's less room for error when you're not enhanced. But the human body is still the same. Protein, it can be converted into muscle tissue. Carbohydrates, when they raise insulin, increase the amino acid uptake into the cell to let that protein do what it does. Some fats actually promote protein synthesis indirectly, like arachidonic acid, inflammatory fat. So they all work the same. The effects are just amplified, and the margin of error is much wider when you're enhanced.
All right. So staying on this piece, how depleted of glycogen do you actually want to be heading into a high day? Is it better to leave some in the tank to fuel the high day workout, or empty the tank and go flat for a super compensated type refill?
You could probably make an argument for both cases, and in that case, I would say you're probably focusing on the wrong specifics when you're worried about that. And I'm looking at someone who has a meet day, a bodybuilding contest day, or a fat loss goal day, like a wedding. And so really your metrics are all bounded by that. If you have a contest day, you don't get to choose really how depleted you get each week. You get to choose where my progress is. And so if your progress allows you to be ahead of schedule, then you want to be less depleted, actually, because then the less depleted you are going into a high day, and in calorie deficit, you're always going to be depleted, but the less depleted you are, the more likely that high day becomes a protein synthesis day where muscle growth can actually occur. And that's in the case, I don't know how many of our listeners are bodybuilders, so I always fall back into that category as my go-to. But if you've ever seen really lean bodybuilders that start a contest prep already in very good condition and they're able to grow into the show, a lot of that is through cases like that where they don't have to be so depleted going into the high day. Then that high day actually turns into a day where they can synthesize new tissue really well, and they'll actually grow muscle at a higher rate than they would when insulin sensitivity is low and calories are more stable in the off season. But if you get someone who has a lot of weight to lose, you need to pretty much be as depleted as you can going into that high day. And really your only reason for ever not depleting further is that you just didn't have time in the week before depleting further, and you were going to start risking muscle loss if you didn't restore. So it's kind of, rather than their one good goal, it changes depending on what your end date is and where you are progress-wise in relation to that end date.
Well, that makes sense. All right. So staying on that theme with Cody, he said, with the shredded carb cycling approach, would it make more sense to do the medium carb day, the day before your lifting days, if you're working out early in the morning before any meals, let's say around 5 to 5:30 a.m.?
I get this asked all the time. And this is one of the things where I think I don't know that there's a clear answer. And I think you can make an argument for all different methods. And I think at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. And I use this analogy a lot, especially as bodybuilders, because it's really hard to make progress. Powerlifters too, it's really hard. Once you get past the beginner stage, it's hard to add muscle, it's hard to add strength. And so you really need to be overly precise with everything to make anything happen. And so it kind of gets people lost in the trees where they're just kind of overly obsessed with the, majoring in the minors, they say. And I'll give an analogy. Things like that would be a very, very small percentage. And so you could take, like you give an example, like a billionaire like Bill Gates walking to a meeting where he's going to acquire a new company. That's $1 billion transfer, and that Microsoft was just about to buy TikTok recently for somewhere between like 12 and 60 billion. So that's billions of dollars of transfer. That's where all the money is. Now, if he's walking to that meeting and he sees loose change on the ground, if he picks it up, yes, he's technically more wealthy. He's picked up a quarter, he's picked up a nickel, but that doesn't matter because he's going to the meeting, and what matters is whether or not he gets to the meeting. And with things like that question, you can make an argument for either way, but neither of them are really going to matter over a 16-week diet. What's going to matter is that you nailed your macros in every day. You didn't cheat on the diet. You hit every cardio session as hard as you should have. You hit every weight training as hard as you should have. And so really it comes down to each person. It might depend on what kind of workouts they're able to get, where they place the high days or medium days and things like that. What I tend to do with my clients as a baseline is the heaviest training day of the week, usually like a leg day, will be the high day. All other training days will be medium days, even if they train first thing in the morning. So they might be training glycogen depleted, and then all off days are low days. And that just sets it easy as a nice baseline, and we can work around that if we find there's enough of a variance from person to person. But that's my go-to. Any training day is either a medium day or a high day, regardless of when you train, whether it's morning or night. And we can adjust around that, but I think you're majoring in the minors if you worry too much about that. That setup right there, as long as you're sufficiently calorie depleted over the course of the week, is going to allow you to burn fat almost optimally and restore glycogen and preserve muscle mass almost optimally.
No, I like it. It makes sense. All right. So here's another one. Why is it important to avoid fat during a high carb day versus increasing overall calorie load on a high day?
It's really not. And that's kind of another one that's majoring in the minors. It's because it's really not. At the end of the day, like we talked, at any given point, it's calories in versus calories out for your body composition. I mean, not for your body mass, your total body mass. And over one given day, we don't change body mass that much. Even, like we just talked about, adding even 12 pounds of muscle a year is a huge amount, but that's 25 grams a day of muscle. So we don't change that much day to day. So on any given day, you wouldn't notice the difference if you did the high day with higher fats. What happens is over time, it does become a difference. And the reason that I keep the fats very low is because we are in a hypercaloric state. So we are storing nutrients. No matter what, we're eating more calories than we burn. We know we're storing nutrients that day. So there's always the potential for some of those nutrients to be stored as fat. No matter what, even the carbohydrates can be stored as fat. Even some of the protein, you go through gluconeogenesis, turn into a carbohydrate, and then get eventually converted to fat if you don't use those calories. It's just more likely that the excess calories that we eat will be stored in a way we want to store them, which would be muscle glycogen or liver glycogen, rather than stored as fat if we keep the fats low. It's not a guarantee. It's just you're always playing the statistics, and the probability is more likely that that's going to occur when we keep the fats low on the high day.
And next one, how do you accurately create a caloric baseline for a client before moving on to a dieting or gaining phase or size?
It's hard. And if you, like someone mentioned, I think they said Shredded or Massive, I have 2 ebooks that actually use an algorithm that I've created that goes by your height, weight, and estimated lean body mass based on what you estimate your body fat to be, that outputs a number. It's not going to be exact for everyone. And so that's why when I work with a client directly, one-on-one, the first email, I leave the caveat that this is our starting point. It's my best guess based on what I know about you, what your photos look like, what you tell me about your daily workouts, what my whole questionnaire list gives. But there's really no hard, fast formula. And you could find any of the formulas online, and they're all going to be equally bad and equally good. There really isn't, there's enough. It's not, the metabolism variance from person to person isn't as dramatic as some people think. A lot of skinny people think they have a crazy high metabolism. A lot of overweight people think they have a really low metabolism. And it typically tends to be a conglomerate of the skinny person does have a slightly higher metabolism, but they also tend to be more active and energetic as a person. And they also tend to have a slightly lower appetite. And the differences become extreme over time because you think, well, like I know a skinny person and they eat all the time and I'm a fat person, I hardly ever eat. It really isn't that. It's a small difference. 100 calories a day, like if one person eats one yogurt a day that the skinny person doesn't, or even 50 calories a day, they eat, I don't know, they accidentally don't level off their measuring cup when they measure something and get 50 extra calories a day and they burn 50 calories less. That's 10 pounds a year or 100 pounds in 10 years. In 10 years, going from age 20 to age 30 and gaining 100 pounds, that's the difference. It's 100 calories a day, which is almost nothing. And so that's when I say, like, the metabolic difference isn't very much on any given day. There is a difference, but it really isn't as dramatic as people think. So you kind of, over time, you get good at understanding where the baseline should be, but you don't nail it 100% every time, which is why a good coach should be adjusting, and especially early in the diet, the first week or two, adjusting pretty quickly until they get things dialed in.
And so do you see any difference for body types as far as dieting goes? Are you changing it based on mesomorph, endomorph, that kind of stuff?
Not really, other than the difference really seems from my perspective is generally insulin sensitivity. And so people say they're carb sensitive, and no, it's not that they're carb sensitive. That you still have to eat more calories than you burn. There's no magic beyond that. People think they're carb sensitive, and they think if they eat rice, no matter what, they're going to get fat. And largely what that comes from is the fact that carbohydrates get stored as glycogen, and 1 gram of glucose, when it stores glycogen, brings 3.5 grams of water with it. So you have 3.5 times as much water weight stored as the carbohydrate weight. And so that's what people tend to see when they're carb sensitive. They think because they're storing glycogen and gaining weight quickly, it's not fat, it's that all that water that gets stored with the glycogen. But that typically, people who tend to be more like endomorphic seem to have lower insulin sensitivity, either whether it's natural or whether you think they're endomorphic because the choices they made the previous 10 years have created an insulin desensitization issue or not. But that seems to be the biggest thing. And so if you look at someone, every once in a while on like a podcast I do, one of my diets will get put up on the screen. And if you see one of my pure mesomorphs, you'll see really, really high carbohydrates, or what seems to be really, really high carbohydrates. And if these really never get put up, but if you saw one of my overweight clients, you would tend to see lower carbohydrates from a percentage of the total calories, but it really isn't a dramatic difference. But getting back to the mesotype thing, it tends to seem that mesomorphs and ectomorphs are slightly more insulin sensitive, and endomorphs are slightly less insulin sensitive, which on one given day really doesn't change your diet that much, but over time it does.
Are you doing anything to improve insulin sensitivity, or using any supplements or things to improve that?
The question on that. Yeah, Berberine is my favorite right now. And I don't have any real research data. I don't work for any research teams right now, but from my own experience with clients, and this is several hundred at this point over the last 8 or 9 years since I've been using Berberine fairly regularly, is that 1,500 milligrams a day of Berberine seems to be roughly as effective as 1,000 milligrams a day of actually prescription metformin in decreasing A1C. I don't really trust fasted. I don't like to use fasted glucose readings. That's everyone's like rage recently, is checking because especially if you work with larger bodybuilders, they have so much blood volume and so much like venous constriction when they're sleeping. First of all, they normally sleep on their backs, so they sleep on their side, and they wake up, their arms asleep, and there's been reduced blood flow or different blood flow. They check their blood sugar first thing like that. You just get a much wider variance of that particular drop of blood from the entire bloodstream than a smaller normal population would be. So I don't like to use it as much with bodybuilders or large power lifters. I prefer A1C. But it does seem that 1,500 milligrams a day of Berberine is roughly as effective as 1,000 milligrams of metformin at improving insulin sensitivity from my limited data.
Nice. So we kind of killed a couple questions there with one. That's awesome. All right. So what's your philosophy on protein requirements? Like, how do you go about, factoring in how much protein someone should be eting?
Yeah, and that's a big one. And we go back to what I started with, that 500 gram things. If you can convert, and I always use an example, Big Ramy. If anyone of you bodybuilders know, Big Ramy is a bodybuilder who went from, in 2010, 220-pound average gym rat. Looked like a mesomorph. You could tell he had been working out, but he certainly didn't look like a pro bodybuilder or anything. Just kind of a guy that played football in high school. Well, 4 years later, he was 300 pounds on the Mr. Olympia stage, one of the largest humans on earth. He did that in 4 years. So that's probably the fastest rate of growth any human has ever grown in history. And if you break it down, 80 pounds over 4 years is 20 pounds per year, which is 1.6 pounds per month or something like that, which is like 0.4 pounds per week, a half a pound a week, which is literally like 30 grams of protein synthesis a day. So if you can boil it down and you could just decide exactly, be so precise where every gram of protein he eats is at the exact right time to create protein synthesis, he would have only needed 30 grams of protein a day to become the largest bodybuilder ever in only 4 years of training. So you can see when you look at it that way, it's like, geez, rather than worry about protein requirements, what's far more important is worry about the efficiency of the protein you eat. Because you're not going to, most of the protein you eat, almost all of it, isn't going to go through protein synthesis. Now, there's some level of protein turnover, and that depends on body size. Protein is just active tissue. Muscle is active tissue. It's always getting broken down, torn, needs to be repaired. It's like a house that goes, that lives in like a tornado area. There's always repairs. The roof's always getting blown up and all that. But that's probably only 50 to 75 grams a day for most people. Maybe a larger bodybuilder that's training really hard, maybe 100 grams. If you combine that with a 30 grams of protein synthesis, that's kind of the max long-term growth, that's still only 130 grams a day. So you really don't need as much as people think. But the caveat is, how little do you need? And who wants to be the one to test that out? Who wants to be the one to only eat 100 grams a day trying to be a bodybuilder? You know, Jay Cutler used to only eat 180 grams a day, and he'd eat like 1,500 grams of carbs or something like that. So I don't know where the number exactly is, but that's some hard, the nice thing is you can do the math. I mean, calories are numbers. We store calories as energy in the body in the form of weight eventually. So you could track these numbers down and see how little it is. I don't really have a number. I would never tell a large bodybuilder to do 130 grams a day, but I've had plenty of large bodybuilders eating only 35 grams a meal, 35 grams of protein a meal on a high day. So that's a little over 200 grams, and these are 300-pound bodybuilders. So you don't need like a gram per pound guaranteed. It depends on what your other macronutrients are, and it's probably less than you think you need also.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that kind of ties into the next question. This is a little bit more about digestion. So how do you improve digestion and absorption of like micronutrients was the specific one?
I have two kind of opinions on this. I don't like to have opinions because, people they want science and facts. But my general opinion on micronutrients is that if you're eating 6 times a day from good, whole, nutritious sources, you're eating organic meat, rice, essential fatty acids, your likelihood of being depleted of micronutrients is very small. I mean, anyone in a first world country, scurvy hasn't been a real issue since Britain was sailing the seas, 250 years ago. We don't typically die or have issues with micronutrient deficiencies outside of vitamin D, fair skin or even, all skin people, but vitamin D in northern climates, because our bodies really haven't adapted yet. We've only been indoor species for, 5,000 years or something. And so our body still hasn't learned to extract vitamin D from food as well as it should. We require the sun too much. So outside of supplement with vitamin D, if you're eating 6 times a day at 4,000 calories a day, you're probably coming across enough micronutrients not to need to worry about it. I mean, it's very morbid, but people in Ethiopia are eating less per week than you eat before lunch from probably not as wide of a variety of food sources that aren't dying of mineral deficiencies. So that's kind of my first view on that. I can't remember what was the question again. I'm sorry.
Just improving digestion. Is there anything that you use?
Improving digestion. And then in general, as digestion, it seems to be, from my perspective, it's really primarily a dehydration issue. What happens is you're eating a lot of protein, a lot of carbohydrate sources that require bulk in the gut to form stool properly. And by bulk, I mean it requires water. That's what fiber does. Is fiber, especially soluble fiber, binds with water to provide bulk, which creates a nice stool sample. And so most people, it seems like they're just not hydrated enough, or there's osmolalric deficiencies or concentration gradients are going the wrong way, where there's not water pooling in the gut as much as it should. And one thing if that is your case, if you're distended, the number one thing is hydrate better. Drink more water. You'll almost always improve your digestion. Number 2 is if you have a problem with that, get an osmolalric or osmolytic laxative like Miralax, which doesn't actually work as a laxative. It works to increase the rate of fluid transfer from the extracellular space into the colon to provide that bulk that you're not doing naturally for whatever reason. Now, if there's digestion issues other than that, like IBS, SIBO, or Crohn's, that's a whole hour-long topic on each one. But those are different. But in general, for people without IBS or major like gut GI issues like that, it's almost always dehydration.
Cool. Let's kind of switch gears here a little bit. Shandy asked, the majority of studies are done on male subjects. How do these numbers processes change for females or even those on hormone therapy? Do you change anything?
Yeah, they do. Not as dramatic as you think, but women in general are going to have a lower muscle mass per body mass ratio. And so your metabolic rate for your total stored energy in the body is going to be lower, meaning a 150-pound male will tend to have a higher metabolism than a 150-pound female. The other big situation where that comes into play is at low body fat levels. Now, and you can't get very many studies on this because it's hard to find willing participants, but done on special forces, they've done extreme starvation diets, basically, during things like Bud's Week or things like that, where you're basically not eating or sleeping for a week at a time and performing a ton of exercise on top of that. And they show that there's almost no muscle loss until sub 6% body fat. And the reason for that is generally men's lower estrogen levels. Now, once you get below that body fat level, the body then starts burning muscle at a higher rate, because at that point it's just a survival mechanism. It needs to slow its metabolism down for whatever reason. But that's largely related to estrogen levels. Now, women obviously have much higher estrogen levels. And so I don't know where that number is, but where they're going to start eating muscle tissue is going to be a much higher body fat level, probably like 12% rather than 5%. And so what you run into is, if you're a competitive female in a physique sport, figure fitness, bodybuilding, physique, you're going to need to be a body fat level where the body will be eating muscle mass almost as a primary energy source because of your high estrogen. And so that's where it really becomes tricky, and where hormone therapy and things like that come into play, where a female would benefit more from reducing estrogen levels so they don't eat the muscle tissue. But that's really the biggest difference between women and men, is the women obviously have less muscle mass per body weight, and then their estrogen levels are higher.
And kind of staying on that subject, do you change anything as far as carb cycling goes for a female's menstrual cycle, or how important is that, if it is important at all to you?
It's not, from a caloric standpoint, it's not really important. From a mental standpoint, it is quite important because the water weight differs so much, and it can be and women, I don't know, men, especially bodybuilders, are most love when the scale doesn't go down. If they can look leaner and the weight doesn't go down, they're like, that's the happiest they'll ever be. A woman, if they look leaner but the weight doesn't go down, typically tend to be not happy, because they want the weight to go down along with looking leaner. And the problem with menstruation really isn't the change in metabolism as much as it is the change in water retention. And that's really dramatic, and it can screw up both ends. It can screw them up mentally because they're not seeing the scale change that they want to see. But it's hard as a coach also because your body fat changes. A female, like we said, you need a 500 calorie per day deficit to lose a pound of fat per week. Well, a small female might only have the basal metabolic rate of 1,500 calories. So to be 1 pound of fat loss per week, you have to drop her down to 1,000 calories a day. That's nothing. I mean, that's really low calorie, and that's only 1 pound of fat loss per week. Well, now if they gain 4 pounds of water on their cycle, that's a month of fat loss that you aren't seeing all in 1 or 2 days, And so it can look like I've erased a month's worth of work in the last 12 hours, which is really hard mentally. And so I don't change anything for it, other than I always say I'm not working with robots, I'm working with people. And if I know enough about a client to know that the scale change is going to dramatically affect them. And what typically happens is, it's like a snowball effect. When things are going good, they tend to go better because the person's motivated. When things are going bad, they gain 4 pounds in a day. And even though they might know that it's water, they don't have the science background, the full understanding to really know it's water. They just know that it must be water, because, well, that tends to snowball and cause, screw it, I'm up 4 pounds. Why does it matter? Let me get ice cream. And so if I know the person is that way, I'll tend to adjust the diet so that the high carb days, maybe we don't have one on them during menstruation cycle, or we adjust the way that we do things so we know that when they're going to be holding more water than usual, we'll mitigate that, and they'll hold slightly less than we would expect. But from a caloric standpoint, it shouldn't really matter.
Okay, nice. All right, so it's kind of staying with macronutrients. So Mike asked about complex carbs versus simple carbs. What's recommended on high carb and low carb days, and any change post workout? That's
a tough one too, because you think simple, you think fast digesting. One of the fastest digesting carbohydrate is actually a very, very complex carbohydrate. You take like a waxy maize, like an amylopectin, and it's just this huge conglomerate of glucose molecules with a ton of surface area. So each one of my fingertips is like a glucose molecule. So what happens is, you take something like that, a high molecular weight carbohydrate, and it goes into the gut. Well, digestion doesn't occur in the stomach, it occurs in the small intestine. But something with a really high molecular weight, really heavy, is going to create a low osmolarity, which is going to pass it through the gut into the small intestine very quickly. And then as soon as it gets in the small intestine, it's got all these glucose molecules on the surface area that can pop through the small intestine lining. And so even though it's a really complex carbohydrate, it's spiking insulin levels and spiking blood sugar minutes after you drink it. Now converse that with a pure simple carbohydrate like a glucose. You chug a glucose drink, and its molecular weight could potentially be lower than the blood in your body. What that does is cause a reverse osmolarity in the stomach. And rather than passing through the stomach into the small intestine, it pools water into the stomach, bloats you, and then the carbohydrates slowly trickle into the small intestine and don't spike insulin as fast or as quickly. And so it's really it's kind of a misnomer to say simple or complex, because that doesn't really mean anything. All complex means is that it's not just one molecule of glucose, it's lots of molecules of glucose. But there's more involved in the molecular structure of that, where something with a lot of glucose molecules can actually get to the stomach, or get through the stomach into the gut or the small intestine into the bloodstream faster. Now, to get back to what they probably really wanted to know, for lower carbohydrate days, I stick to almost all complex carbohydrates. And the reason for that is that they tend to digest slower. Not guaranteed, not always, but they tend to, and they also tend to take up more space. 30 grams of carbohydrates from corn or rice or oatmeal is a lot more volume in your stomach and a lot more chewing than 30 grams of carbohydrates from grapes. I mean, or, because you can get 30 grams of carbohydrates from a banana in 2 bites. And I might have seen some porn sites where girls do it in 1 bite even, if you really get down to it. But, 30 grams of carbohydrates from oatmeal, it's half a cup of oatmeal, you froth that up with water, really soak it up, you could be eating that for 15 minutes. And so that's primarily why I do that. On high carbohydrate days, I do more of a mix. What I typically tend to tell my clients, especially on dieting fat loss clients, is that 50% of their carbohydrates in each meal on a high day can come from sugary sources, simple sources. And that kind of gives two benefits. They get that sweetness, which is a nice, mouth feel, and it decreases their food volume a little bit, so they're not so distended. But the complex sources still digest slow enough that their blood sugars tend to be stable throughout the day. Now, it's a high carbohydrate day, so their blood sugar levels are high, but they're pretty stable with that mix of simple and complex. But on a lower carbohydrate, so basically, I guess if I could sum it up really quickly, lower carbohydrate days would have more complex carbohydrate sources. The higher carbohydrate days would have more simple sugars. You can get away with it anyways.
Kind of staying on this idea. So do you have any ideas to help subdue cravings and that kind of stuff? Really getting someone to stick to the plan?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of cravings. They come from lots of different things. There's food volume craving. And so when our stomachs get empty, we feel hungry from just kind of the baroreceptors in our stomach, noticing that our stomach isn't swollen. That's one type of hunger. But there's hunger hormones also that we know, leptin and ghrelin, and those increase hunger a different way. And that tends to come from being in a low caloric state for a period of time. But then there's also cravings from kind of deficiencies. If you're deficient in salt, you're going to crave saltier foods. If you're someone who's got like a high sodium or a low sodium reabsorption rate in the kidneys, you're going to flush sodium at a higher percentage than someone else. You're going to tend to crave salty foods, and salty foods tend to kind of, with the way our brain works from a hunger and a satiety way, kind of fat will solve the salt cravings almost equally, if that makes sense. So those type of people might actually be craving salt, but they'll tend to eat fatty foods to cure that. And then there's also, like sweetness type things. And so there's all kinds of things going on. So you have to fix cravings, you have to, one, find foods with a high volume. So that baroreceptor craving is mitigated, meaning your stomach isn't completely empty. Now, the leptin and ghrelin, there's only so much you can do with that. There really isn't much you can do. And on most of the research chemicals out there to affect hunger hormones work to increase hunger hormones, not decrease them. But things that decrease them would be stimulants. And so a lot of times, like the typical over-the-counter fat burners that are high in caffeine will do that. Nicotine decreases the sensation of those hormones. And then like beta agonists like ephedrine or things like that would do the same thing. Now, the individual cravings, you can always work those into a diet. If someone's craving salt, they might think they're craving fat. A lot of times it's salt. You can counteract that with a 0-calorie solution. Salt has 0 calories. People craving sweetness, you can fix that really easy. One, there's artificial sweeteners. And two, if we're doing a carbohydrate cycling diet on the high carb days, we have plenty of time to satisfy those sweetness things. Another thing that I do with my clients is I try to do as much as possible with someone in a fat loss diet is 1 meal a week. I try to give them a free meal. Now, that's the baseline. If it turns out that if they're eating too much in the free meal, we might put, guidelines on the free meal, like 30 minutes of 1,500 calories. And then if they still aren't, then we might restrict it further. But I try to give 1 meal a week. So no matter what's going on, no matter how much you're suffering, you're never more than 6 days of being able to satisfy whatever craving you have.
Yeah, I mean, so there's another question. Do you feel like sweeteners are harmful for gut health? I mean, do you feel like there's anything there? Since you just kind of
No, and I think it's kind of no, not. I mean, I don't think they're great. You know, I don't think you want to just pour Splenda in your stomach all day. But if you look at what aspartame is one of the molecules is phenylalanine, which the first thing it does is it gets broken down to L-tyrosine and phenylalanine. And L-tyrosine is actually, L-tyrosine is sold as a supplement to decrease hunger and increase energy, you know, because L-tyrosine is the precursor for the dopaminergic and the norepinephrine and epinephrine pathways. So it's basically a precursor for the adrenaline hormones, which decrease appetite and increase energy. So if you look at it from a chemical standpoint, they're actually beneficial to a diet outside of, you know, outside of the fact that there's 0 calories. But I don't think it matters really one way or the other. I mean, I think people worry about strange things, basically. 50% of Americans are going to die of obesity-related illnesses, and a lot of them will be directly linked to high sugar and especially high fructose corn syrup intakes. So 50% of us, half of Americans are going to die basically from eating too much sugar and too much high fructose corn syrup. But and none of us are going to die from aspartame poisoning. We're just not. None of us are going to die from artificial sweeteners. 50% of us are going to die from not using artificial sweeteners, if you look at it from like a grand perspective type thing. So no, they're probably not great. Water would be better. But the thing is that's not what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with either you have to be perfect and only drink natural spring water and eat whole foods, or, you know, what we have is that half of Americans are dying from too much sugar. If aspartame or any artificial sweetener, sucralose, allows you to eat less of that sugar, I'll take that 50% survival rate. I'll take my 99.99999% survival rate every time.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So staying on this kind of supplement piece, is the craze for digestive enzymes or probiotics overblown, or is through chewing, meal spacing, and hydration, you know, the best things to focus on?
I think probiotics are overblown. I know lots of people who claim benefit of probiotics, who use them regularly, religiously, and swear they're beneficial. I have not seen that play out in people who were not using probiotics, come into a digestion issue, start taking probiotics, and it clears up. I've not seen that consistently at all. I've seen far more likely that a person wasn't taking probiotics, stops or has a digestion issue, starts taking probiotics, and notices no benefit. I also have had many people taking probiotics and for whatever reason, and swear they're getting a benefit, and for whatever reason run out, don't order more, and don't notice a loss in digestion. Now, these aren't research studies. I'm talking about a handful of people, and that doesn't mean anything when you're talking about large sample research data. But in my experience, digestive issues don't seem to be corrected with probiotics enough for me to say, oh, you have digestive issues, take a probiotic, you're going to be good. I feel like that's almost the majority of the time that's not going to fix it. My experience, hydration, like I said, is by far the biggest helper, and then it's just hydration. And then if there's actual digestive issues beyond that, in my experience, it tends to be things like a gluten allergy, someone with celiacs, or early IBS type symptoms, or early Crohn's, or UC, or things like that. If it's just purely someone's like bloated or seems like they're constipated, I would take extra hydration over probiotics 100 times out of 100.
Nice. All right. So when you said there was going to be a few questions, like, you weren't lying. I'm trying to sort through here and try and get to a bunch of different ones. But let's say someone wants to progress their knowledge in this. They want to kind of take things to the next level. What would be some good resources for them to start studying that would allow them to understand this concept better?
A university level physiology book, preferably anatomy and physiology, but for sure physiology. Understand how the body works, understand what the glycolytic pathway is, understand glycolysis, how ATP is created, how fat is used for energy, how gluconeogenesis occurs, why it occurs, how triglycerides are formed, how the pancreas, the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas secrete insulin, how insulin is a ligand binding system, how it binds to the ligand system, shuffles proteins around and exerts its effect, how the kidneys function, how the glomerular capsule works, how decreasing sodium reabsorption at the distal tubule of the glomerular capsule increases your rate of urinalysis, how much you pee out. Learn all that stuff, because if you don't have that background, all you're doing is listening to other people and repeating what they say without knowing what they say. You're not able to internalize it. You're just going to repeat other things that you've heard. Which, if you only find good sources, that's great. You're only going to hear good things, and you can repeat those. But there aren't only good sources out there, and there's a lot of a frustratingly high amount of bad material on the internet. Almost so much so that I say it's gotten so bad where I almost say, for most cases of high-end performance nutrition, if you read it on the internet for free, it's probably wrong. And it's almost by definition forced to be that way, because there's so much information on the internet that if what that person was saying worked as well as they claim it's going to work, they're not going to be some anonymous person on the internet. They're going to be some high-level athlete who is not giving anonymous information on the internet. Or if they're a high-level coach giving that information for free, if it actually worked, they would be a high-level coach charging for that information. So it's gotten so bad where a lot of the really high-level, precise performance nutrition information I see is the opposite of what you should do. And so it's really bad. And so that's why I can't stress enough that, as boring as it is and as frustrating and uninteresting as it is to read a university level physiology textbook, without that background, you're never going to be able to decipher the garbage information on the internet. Now, as far as performance nutrition books, I actually have two of them, Comprehensive Nutrition 1 and 2, that I think are the Comprehensive Performance Nutrition Volume 1 is really more pure nutrition based and carbohydrate cycling and things like that. And it's set up in a Q&A format, kind of like this. Volume 2 is covers more things like supplements and training and kind of dispelling some myths about the fitness industry. But 1 is more pure nutrition based.
So if people want to check those out and learn more about that, where would they go?
TroponinNutrition.com, or just, I think if you Google Justin Harris carb cycling, or even you can buy Comprehensive Performance Nutrition on Amazon too. But you can get anything through my website, TroponinNutrition.com.
Okay. So anyone listening, if you're looking at going deeper into this, check out TroponinNutrition.com or use the good old Google machine to get you there. Justin, if people want to maybe connect with you or find out more about what you're doing, what are some of the best ways to learn more about what you've got going on?
The contact us site at TroponinNutrition.com. You can find me on Instagram. My name is Troponin_nutrition. I'm on Facebook as Justin Harris. I'm on TikTok as I think. Any social media, or you could email me. I guess my email is justin@troponinnutrition.com. Troponin Nutrition I'll go on a little tangent. It was my name on bodybuilding forums about 20 years ago was Troponin. It was either Troponin or tropomyosin, and that's because when calcium goes into a muscle cell, binds troponin, moves troponin off tropomyosin, and allows the muscular contraction to occur. And I just happened to pick those names 20 years ago. Troponin is also the cardiac marker for a heart attack. So unintentionally, I was just working with so many clients that I needed to kind of organize a website together to handle my coaching business. And because everyone knew me as Troponin, I named it Troponin Nutrition, never thinking it would build into an entire business. And then so I'm stuck with now telling people, Justin@TroponinNutrition.com. How do you spell that? Is there 2 N's in the middle? But in general, if you go to any of my social media, you can reach me there.
Awesome, Justin. This was just a breath of knowledge, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day to share some of it with us. So for those of you listening, if you want to check out more, TroponinNutrition.com, look him up. Definitely on when we're thinking about high-level coaching, Justin Harris comes to mind. So appreciate you, Justin, for taking your time, and have a great rest of your day, brother.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. This was another great session brought to you by Coach Catalyst, your nutrition coaching software partner. Head on over to coachcatalyst.com/summit to get started on your free, no credit card 30-day trial. And remember, anyone that signs up for a trial during the summit will get our nutrition coaching playbook on the house. So another great session. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys all in about 5 minutes. See you later.